The silk of the dress was a cool, heavy whisper against her skin. It was a dark, forest green, a color she loved but never wore, and it clung to every curve of her body without apology. In her own apartment, in the privacy of her own mirror, Eleanor Vance had thought it looked elegant. Here, under the weight of 1,000 crystal lights in the hotel ballroom, surrounded by women who were built like knives, she felt like a ship in a harbor full of yachts. Conspicuous, large, slow. She was here for one reason. Mr. Costello had required her presence. As his private secretary, his requests were not suggestions. He had said it was important for her to understand all facets of the business. She understood spreadsheets and encrypted schedules. She did not understand this, the clinking of champagne flutes and the predatory smiles that never reached the eyes of the men in their perfect suits. The air was thick with perfume and power. However, the real weight in the room was the man standing beside her. Marco Costello. He was preternaturally still, a statue carved from Italian marble and quiet violence. He had not spoken more than 3 words to her since they arrived, yet his presence was a shield and a cage all at once. People gave them a wide berth. They looked, their eyes flicking from his impassive face to her, a question mark in their gaze. She was not the kind of woman who stood beside Marco Costello. Then, a man approached, his own suit a shade too loud, his smile a degree too wide. His name was Lorenzo Rossi, and even Eleanor, insulated as she was by spreadsheets and phone calls, knew that name. It was a name spoken in whispers in Mr. Costello's office, a name synonymous with trouble. "Marco," Rossi said, his voice slick. "Good to see you out. And this is—" His eyes dismissed Eleanor in a single, sweeping glance. He saw a large woman in an expensive dress, a piece of furniture her employer had brought along for reasons he could not fathom. Marco Costello did not look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on Rossi, a gaze as flat and cold as a winter lake. "My wife," he said. The words dropped into the small space between them like stones. The orchestra swelled, covering the sudden silence. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her mind went completely blank, a pure white screen of shock. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. A strange, cruel, inexplicable joke. Rossi's smile faltered, confusion clouding his features. He looked at her again, properly this time, searching for the punchline. Eleanor felt a blush crawl up her neck, a hot, mortifying wave of heat. She was a professional. She was his competent, organized, invisible secretary. She was not part of the performance. But the words were out, hanging in the air, and a response was required. She looked down at her hands, at the simple, unadorned fingers that typed his letters and organized his life. A small, trembling smile touched her lips. She met Rossi's eyes, forcing a lightness she did not feel into her voice. "I wish that were true." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a terrible mistake. It was too honest, too raw. It was the sound of a secret hope spoken aloud in a room full of wolves. Rossi's confusion cleared, replaced by a flicker of something sharp and calculating. He saw it then. He saw a weakness, a vulnerability, an angle. Marco's hand found the small of her back, a touch that was less a comfort and more a claim. His fingers were firm, a silent command to be still. He had not moved, had not reacted, but the temperature around them had dropped by 20 degrees. He had thrown the stone into the water, and she, with her foolish, honest heart, had just shown everyone where the ripples were heading. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of tension. Rossi excused himself with a nod that was a little too sharp, his eyes lingering on Eleanor for a second too long. After he was gone, others came. They were more subtle, their questions veiled, their glances careful. But the story was already spreading through the room, a current of rumor and speculation. Marco Costello, a man who had shown no interest in any woman since his first wife's death years ago, had brought a date. And not just a date. He had called her his wife. Eleanor played her part. She smiled when it was appropriate. She murmured polite greetings. She stood by his side, a silent, statuesque figure in green silk. But inside, her professional calm had shattered. She was his employee, an excellent one. She managed the impenetrable fortress of his schedule, knew which calls to put through and which to bury. She knew his coffee order, the exact shade of ink he preferred for his pens, and the names of every shell corporation he controlled. Her value was in her discretion, in her invisibility. Tonight, he had painted a target on her back. The ride back to his office tower was suffocatingly silent. The city lights slid past the tinted windows of the Maybach, a glittering, indifferent river. Eleanor sat perfectly straight, her hands clasped in her lap, her purse clutched like a life raft. She stared ahead, not daring to look at him. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and analytical. He was assessing her, assessing the damage. She had expected him to have the driver take her home. Instead, they pulled into the private underground garage of his skyscraper. The silence stretched as the engine died. "Come upstairs, Eleanor," he said. It was not a request. His private office was on the top floor, a vast space of glass and steel and black leather that overlooked the entire city. It was a room she knew intimately, yet it had never felt like this. It had never felt like a cage. He did not turn on the main lights. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the city casting him in silhouette. "You did well tonight," he said, his back still to her. "Mr. Costello?" she began, her voice tight. "Why did you do that? Why did you tell him that?" He turned then, his face half in shadow, half in the cold glow of the skyline. His eyes were dark, unreadable pits. "Because Lorenzo Rossi is planning to kill me, and I needed to give him a reason to hesitate." Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What do I have to do with that? Men like Rossi understand two things: money and family. He can come for my money. That is business. But to come for a man's wife, that is a declaration of war. It is a line that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. It makes the conflict personal, messy, unpredictable." She shook her head, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "But I am not your wife. He will find that out. Everyone will. Not tonight, he will not. Tonight I sowed doubt. I created a complication. I put a piece on the board he was not expecting. He took a step closer. Your response to him, I wish that were true, that was effective. It made the lie believable. Effective. She had bled a drop of her most private, humiliating truth onto the ballroom floor, and he called it effective. The blush returned, hotter this time, a burn of shame and anger. "You used me," she said, the words barely a whisper. "I used a tool at my disposal," he corrected her, his voice devoid of emotion. "That is what you are, Eleanor. The most effective tool I possess. You are closer to me than any of my men. You know my movements, my finances, my meetings. You are completely trusted and completely invisible. Or you were." That was the moment the true cost of the evening landed. He had not just put her in danger. He had destroyed her greatest asset, her invisibility. "Rossi will look into you now," Marco continued, his voice a low, steady rhythm. "He will find out you are my secretary. He will wonder what secrets you know. He will assume you are my weakness. And he will try to use you to get to me." She wrapped her arms around herself, the beautiful green dress suddenly feeling like a shroud. "So what happens now?" "Now, you are no longer just my secretary," he said, closing the remaining distance between them. He stood before her, so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of sandalwood and something else, something metallic and cold, like steel. "You are under my protection, which means you do not go home. You do not go anywhere without my men. You will stay here in the residence upstairs until this is over." It was not a choice. It was a verdict. She had walked into that ballroom as Eleanor Vance, his competent, overqualified secretary. She was leaving it as a pawn in a game she never asked to play, a prisoner in a gilded cage. She had thought her job was dangerous because of the information she handled. But she had been wrong. The real danger was not in the information. It was in the man who controlled it. and now he controlled her too. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. Eleanor lived in a guest suite 2 floors above the office that was larger and more luxurious than her entire apartment. Men with stony faces and guns, hidden beneath their jackets, followed her from the suite to the office and back again. She was never alone. Her life, once meticulously her own, now belonged to him. She still did her job. She managed his schedule, filtered his calls, prepared his documents. The work was an anchor in the storm, the one piece of her old life she could cling to, but the context had changed. Every name in his calendar was now a potential threat. Every financial transfer was a clue. She was no longer just typing. She was watching, learning. Marco was a constant, unnerving presence. He worked with a relentless, focused intensity. He would be in his office before she arrived and long after she retired to her gilded prison upstairs. Sometimes, late at night, she would find him standing by the window, just as he had that first night, staring down at the city he ruled. He looked tired in those moments, the iron control slipping just enough for her to see the deep weariness in his shoulders. He never mentioned the gala again. He never joked. He treated her with a cool, formal distance. And yet, things had shifted between them. He would watch her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, his gaze lingering. He started calling her Eleanor, his pronunciation of her name a low, quiet rumble that was different from how anyone else had ever said it. One evening, she was working late, cross-referencing a series of wire transfers that seemed off. They were disguised as payments to a maintenance contractor, but the amounts were too large, the frequency too regular. Her pen hovered over the ledger. It was a loose thread. She could feel it. The door to the office opened, and Marco walked in. He had loosened his tie, and the top button of his stark white shirt was undone. He looked less like a crime lord and more like a man bearing an impossible weight. "You should not be working this late," he said. It was not a reprimand. It was a statement of fact. "I found something," she said, her voice quiet. She pushed the ledger across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. "These payments to Apex Consolidated, they're a shell. I checked their incorporation documents. The registered agent is a law firm that Rossi has used for years." He picked up the ledger, his eyes scanning the page. For a long moment he was silent. The only sound in the room was the hum of the city far below. She watched his hands, the way his long fingers traced the column of numbers. On his right pinky, he wore a heavy gold signet ring, intricately carved. It had belonged to his father, and his father before him. It was a symbol of his entire world. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. It was a flicker of respect, of surprise. "My accountants missed this," he said. "They were looking at the numbers," Eleanor replied. "I was looking for the story." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "My brother Antonio," he said, his voice suddenly rough. "He was like you. He saw the stories in things. He trusted people. He brought a man into our family, vouched for him. That man sold him to our enemies for a piece of territory in Boston." Eleanor's heart clenched. She had heard whispers about his brother, the former head of the family, whose death had put Marco in charge. No one ever spoke of it directly. It was his wound, the ghost that haunted the entire organization. "He died because he trusted the wrong person," Marco said, his voice flat, but the pain beneath it was a chasm. "I have not made that mistake since." He was telling her something important. He was showing her the scar he carried, the reason for his coldness, his paranoia. He was telling her why he trusted no one. And yet he was trusting her. With this ledger, with this story. A car backfired on the street below, the sound sharp and violent, like a gunshot. Eleanor flinched, a visceral, involuntary reaction. In a split second, Marco was out of his chair and moving toward her. He did not say a word. He simply put himself between her and the vast wall of glass, his body a solid, immovable shield. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, his grip firm, grounding her. The moment passed. The sound was not repeated. It was just the city, noisy and chaotic. But he did not move away. She was standing in his shadow, enveloped by his presence, by the scent of sandalwood and steel. She could feel the warmth of his body, the solid muscle beneath the fine cotton of his shirt. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. It was not just fear. It was something else, something terrifying and new. He looked down at her. His eyes, usually so cold, held a different light, a flicker of something raw. He was too close. The space between them was charged, electric. He had not touched her since the gala, and this touch was different. It was not a claim. It was protective. It was an instinct he had not been able to suppress. Slowly, as if it cost him a great deal, he dropped his hand. He stepped back, putting space between them again. The spell was broken, but the air in the room had been irrevocably altered. "Find out who authorized these payments," he said, his voice back to its usual clipped tone. "I want a name." She nodded, unable to speak. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving her alone with the damning ledger and the ghost of his touch on her shoulder. Therefore, she did not go to her suite. She returned to the desk, her focus narrowed to a single point. He had trusted her. She would not fail him. Eleanor worked for 2 days straight, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. She cross-referenced invoices, personnel files, and security logs. The authorization for the payments was buried under 3 layers of digital protocols, signed off by someone with the highest level of clearance. Someone in Marco's inner circle. The name she finally uncovered made her feel sick. It was Sal Marchesi, Marco's underboss, the man who had been his brother's best friend, the man Marco trusted more than anyone. The knowledge was a dangerous weight. She could not just tell him. An accusation like this against a man like Sal, it was not something you made lightly. It would tear the family apart. She needed proof, absolute, undeniable proof, and she knew where to find it. Sal kept a private server in his office, one he thought no one knew about. Eleanor knew about it because she had ordered the parts for it 6 months ago, disguised as an upgrade for the main system. She had to get into his office. That evening, she made her move. She used a late-night meeting Marco had across town as her window of opportunity. She told his guards she needed to retrieve a file from the main records room, which was on the same floor as Sal's office. They hesitated. Her orders were to remain in the office or her suite. "Mr. Costello needs the Rossi file for his meeting," she lied, her voice crisp and authoritative. "The original. Do you want to be the one to tell him I could not get it for him?" They exchanged a look. Then one of them nodded grimly and escorted her down. He stood guard at the end of the hall while she slipped into the records room. She waited a full minute, then silently let herself out and crept down the darkened corridor to Sal's office. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was a line she had never imagined crossing. This was not the action of a secretary. It was the action of a conspirator. The lock was easy. She had the master codes. Inside, the office was dark, smelling of stale cigar smoke. She found the server, a small black box hidden behind a bookshelf. She attached a portable drive, her fingers flying across the keyboard, initiating the data transfer. It would take 10 minutes. 10 minutes where every creak of the building was a footstep, every distant siren a sign of discovery. The drive finished. She pocketed it, slid the server back into place, and was about to leave when she heard voices from the hallway. Sal's voice, and one of the guards. They were coming back early. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. There was no other way out. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the heavy velvet curtains covering the window. Without a second thought, she slipped behind them, pressing herself flat against the cold glass. The space was barely wide enough to conceal her. She held her breath, praying the shadows would be enough. The door opened. The lights flicked on. "He's getting paranoid, I tell you," Sal was saying. "Bringing that woman everywhere. Sticking her in the middle of our business." "The boss knows what he's doing," the guard replied, his voice non-committal. "Does he?" Sal scoffed. He moved to his desk, just feet from where she was hiding. Antonio knew what he was doing, too. Look where it got him. Sometimes the head needs to be cut off for the body to survive. Eleanor felt the blood freeze in her veins. He was admitting it. He was the one. She heard the clink of a glass, the gurgle of liquor being poured. She risked a glance through a tiny gap in the curtains. Sal was at his desk, his back to her. But then he turned, walking toward the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was going to open the curtains. He was going to see her. Her mind raced. There was no escape. This was how it ended. Discovered in the trader's office. A dead woman with a secret. But then, from the hallway, Marco's voice cut through the air, sharp and lethal. Sal, my office. Now. Sal stopped dead, his hand hovering near the curtain pull. A flicker of fear crossed his face before he masked it. Boss, he said, turning away from the window. You're back early. Now, Marco repeated. The single word held more menace than a shouted threat. Sal put his drink down and left the office, the guard following him. The door clicked shut, plunging the room back into darkness. Eleanor stayed frozen for a full minute, her body trembling with adrenaline. He had saved her. He had no idea he was saving her, but he had. She slipped out of the office and back to the records room, her legs unsteady. When she returned to Marco's office, he was waiting for her, standing by the window. Sal was gone. You have the Rossi file? He asked, his voice neutral. She walked to his desk and placed the portable drive on the polished mahogany. I have something better, she said. I have the name you wanted. And the proof. He looked from the drive to her face. He saw the tremor in her hands, the fear still lingering in her eyes. He knew she had done more than just look through a ledger. She had taken a risk. For him. He picked up the drive, his expression unreadable. You have crossed a line tonight, Eleanor. So have you, she replied, her voice shaking but firm. He did not get angry. He did not yell. He simply watched her, and the look in his eyes was something new. It was a dangerous, possessive understanding. He knew what she was now. She was not just a tool. She was a weapon. His weapon. No one else, he said, the words a vow, a brand. I trust no one else. That was his confession. More intimate than any declaration of love. More binding than any promise. But this confession came with a cost. By exposing Sal, she had lit a fuse. The traitor knew he was discovered. He would not wait to be cornered. He would strike. And now he knew exactly who to target. The end came faster than she expected. Sal, knowing he was exposed, made a desperate move. He tried to force a meeting of the other capos, to paint Marco as weak and compromised, using Eleanor as his proof. He claimed Marco's judgment was clouded, that he was putting a civilian woman before the good of the family. But Marco was ready. He called the sit-down himself, in the formal dining room of a restaurant he owned in Little Italy. It was a room with no windows and only one door. Eleanor was there. He insisted. She was not to be hidden away. She was to be at his side. She wore a simple black dress, the opposite of the green silk she had worn at the gala. This was not a party. It was a reckoning. The room was filled with hard-faced men, their loyalty hanging in the balance. Sal stood at the far end of the long table, his face a mask of false confidence. He brings this woman into our world, Sal began, his voice ringing with indignation as he pointed at Eleanor. He calls her his wife. He shares our secrets with her. He is compromised. Eleanor's hands were steady in her lap. She met the gaze of every man in that room, her expression calm. She was not afraid. Not anymore. Marco did not rise. He simply gestured to Eleanor. She found the leak that has been bleeding this family for 5 years, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. She found the payments you were making to Rossi, Sal. She found the story. He placed the portable drive on the table. And she found this. He played the recording. A hidden microphone in Sal's office had captured his conversation from the night Eleanor had hidden behind the curtains. His words about Antonio, his treason. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and lethal. Sal's face went white. He looked from the drive to Marco, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. He had been so careful. "She is not my weakness," Marco said, his voice like ice. "She is the reason you are no longer breathing." It happened in an instant, a blur of motion. Sal lunged, not for Marco, but for Eleanor. He had a knife in his hand, a last, desperate act of vengeance. The man beside her, Marco's most loyal soldier, moved to intercept him. There was a sickening thud, a grunt of pain. The soldier went down, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. But it had bought the time needed. Marco was on his feet, his own movement a surgical, brutal ballet. The confrontation was over before Eleanor could even register the sequence of events. Sal lay on the floor, still and silent. The threat was neutralized. The cost had been paid. A good man was wounded, a price for her safety, for Marco's throne. The other capos sat in stunned silence. They looked at Marco, then at Eleanor. They understood. She was not a weakness. She was his eyes, his mind, an extension of his will. Later, after the room had been cleared and the mess had been quietly and efficiently handled, they were alone in his office once more. The city lights glittered outside, oblivious. The war was over, for now. Marco stood before her. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was no longer hesitant. It was certain. "It is done," he said. "You are free. I will give you anything you want. A new name, a new life, a bank account with enough money to go anywhere, be anyone. You have earned it." She looked up at him, at this man of shadows and violence, this king in a bespoke suit. He was offering her an escape, a return to the ordinary world she had once known. But she did not want it. That world seemed small now and colorless. She had crossed a line, and she could not go back. She was not the same woman who had walked into that gala in a green dress. She had seen the man behind the mask, the weary protector, the wounded brother. And he had seen her, the competent, loyal, intelligent woman who was more than just her body, more than just her job. She did not answer him with words. She simply reached out and laid her hand on his desk, next to his. Her fingers were inches from the heavy gold signet ring. A silent statement, a choice. He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. A slow, rare smile touched his lips, a smile that did not quite reach his cold eyes, but it was a start. He covered her hand with his own, his grip warm and absolute. The space between them was gone. In this world, nothing was given. Everything was taken or earned. And they had just earned this.